The sun set over the sprawling city skyline, casting a golden glow across the towering buildings. Among them stood the penthouse of Maxwell Max Sterling, one of the wealthiest men in the country. Max had built his fortune through cutthroat business deals and an uncanny ability to predict market trends. But while he was admired by many for his success, those who truly knew him saw a different side. Arrogant, entitled, and dismissive of anyone he deemed beneath him. This side of Max became glaringly evident one chilly autumn morning, when his assistant entered his office with a stack of papers. Max barely looked up from his leather chair. "What is it now, Linda?" he asked impatiently, his tone dripping with irritation. "There's an issue with the Sterling Heights property, sir," she replied, hesitating for a moment. "A tenant in one of the units hasn't vacated. It's her family." Max raised an eyebrow, finally looking up. "I thought I made it clear. Everyone was supposed to be out by last week. Sterling Heights is being demolished for the new development." "Yes, sir, but—" "No buts," Max snapped, slamming his hand on the desk. "Get them out. I don't care who they are or what their excuse is. Rules are rules." Linda nodded but couldn't hide her unease. She knew this family's story, and while she didn't dare challenge Max, something about this situation didn't sit right. The family in question lived in a modest two-bedroom unit on the edge of the complex. The Johnsons, Elijah, a history professor, his wife, Mia, an accomplished artist, and their teenage daughter, Zoe, had called it home for nearly a decade. To them, it was more than just a place to live. It was where they had built memories, celebrated milestones, and weathered life's storms together. Elijah was a man of quiet strength, respected in his community and loved by his students. Mia's art had gained recognition for its powerful themes of resilience and unity, though she remained humble about her success. So, bright and ambitious, had dreams of becoming a journalist. Together, they were a picture of dignity and perseverance, even in the face of challenges. When the eviction notice arrived, Elijah tried to negotiate. He reached out to the property managers, explaining that they needed more time to find suitable housing. But every plea was met with the same response: the decision is final. And now the decision lay in Max's hands. The following day, Max arrived at Sterling Heights in his sleek black car, flanked by his legal team. He intended to oversee the eviction personally, ensuring there were no further delays. As he stepped out of the car, dressed in a tailored suit and designer sunglasses, he exuded an air of superiority. He spotted the Johnsons standing by their unit, surrounded by a few hastily packed boxes. Elijah stood tall, his arm protectively around Mia, while Zoe glared at Max with a mix of defiance and heartbreak. Max smirked, amused by their defiance. "This doesn't have to be difficult," he said, his voice cold and detached. "You've had your time. Now it's time to go." Elijah took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Sterling, we've lived here for years. This isn't just a house to us, it's our home. We're not asking for much, just a little more time." Max raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "I don't do charity. This is business. You're wasting my time." Before Elijah could respond, Leah stepped in. "Do you even know who we are?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fire in her eyes. Max chuckled, glancing at his watch. "Should I? Because right now, all I see is a family standing in the way of progress." Mia exchanged a look with Elijah, as if deciding whether to say more. But before she could speak, Zoe stepped forward, her voice shaking with emotion. "You don't see us because you don't want to, but maybe you should. Because one day, Mr. Sterling, you might realize you've underestimated the wrong people." Max scoffed, turning to his team. "Enough of this. Get them out." As the movers approached, Elijah placed a hand on Zoe's shoulder, silently urging her to stand down. But the tension was palpable. This wasn't just about a building anymore. It was about pride, dignity, and standing up against someone who thought money could buy anything. What Max didn't know, however, was that the Johnsons weren't just any family. Beneath their humble exterior lay a story far more powerful than he could have imagined. A story that would soon force Max to confront his own ignorance and challenge everything he thought he knew about power, success, and humanity. And as he walked away, confident in his victory, Max had no idea that his actions had just set in motion a chain of events that would change his life forever. The movers began their work, hauling boxes and furniture out of the Johnsons' unit, with a mechanical efficiency that made the entire scene feel surreal. So stood frozen, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as though trying to hold herself together. Mia gently touched her daughter's arm, whispering, "Let's not give him the satisfaction." Elijah watched in silence, his jaw tight. He wanted to fight, to resist, but he also knew the stakes. There was no point in losing his temper now. That would only play into Max's hands. Instead, he focused on keeping his family grounded. But the pain was evident in his eyes, the kind of pain that came from knowing you've been dismissed without a second thought. Max lingered for a moment, watching the scene unfold with a smug sense of satisfaction. This could have been so much easier, he muttered to no one in particular before turning to leave. But as he walked toward his car, he caught a glimpse of one of Mia's paintings leaning against the side of the box. The colors were vivid and raw, depicting a group of people holding hands, standing firm against the storm. It was hauntingly beautiful, yet something about it made Max uneasy. He didn't linger on the thought, brushing it off as another piece of junk that would soon be forgotten. The Johnsons spent the rest of the day relocating to a motel on the outskirts of the city. It was a far cry from the home they'd loved, but Elijah tried to focus on the practicalities. "It's temporary," he reassured Mia as they unpacked the essentials. "We'll figure this out." Mia nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She'd been keeping something from Elijah, something she hadn't been sure how to share. Now, with everything falling apart, she wondered if it was finally time. But she decided to wait, letting the dust settle first. Meanwhile, Zoe sat by the motel window, staring out at the unfamiliar surroundings. She pulled out her journal, the one place where she could pour out her thoughts without judgment. The words came fast and furious, her emotions spilling onto the page. The anger, the frustration, the burning need to prove that they were more than what Max Sterling thought. "He doesn't get to win," she wrote, underlining the words until the ink bled through the paper. Back at his penthouse, Max poured himself a glass of whiskey and sank into his plush armchair. He felt a fleeting sense of triumph, but it was quickly overshadowed by an unshakable unease. For reasons he couldn't explain, the image of that painting kept creeping into his mind. He tried to distract himself by scrolling through the latest market updates, but the numbers blurred together. Finally, he set his phone down and stared out at the city lights. Max prided himself on being a man of control, someone who never let emotions cloud his judgment. Yet something about today's encounter had unsettled him. Maybe it was the quiet dignity with which Elijah had carried himself, or the defiance in Zoe's eyes. Or maybe it was Mia's question, still echoing in his mind. "Do you even know who we are?" The next morning, Max's assistant, Linda, entered his office with a hesitant knock. She placed a folder on his desk, avoiding his gaze. "I thought you might want to see this," she said, her voice almost apologetic. Max frowned, opening the folder. Inside were background checks on the Johnsons. He skimmed through the pages, his interest piqued when he reached Mia's profile. Her art had been featured in several prominent galleries, and one of her pieces had even been auctioned for a staggering sum. Elijah's credentials were equally impressive. He wasn't just a professor, but a widely published historian, whose work had been cited in academic circles around the world. Max leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowing. This wasn't what he'd expected. He'd assumed they were just another struggling family clinging to a place they couldn't afford. But the more he read, the more he realized how wrong he'd been. "Interesting," he muttered, flipping to the next page. That's when he saw a photo of Zoe at an awards ceremony, holding a trophy for a statewide writing competition. The caption beneath it read, "Future journalists with a passion for uncovering the truth." Max felt a twinge of discomfort. He'd underestimated them, And now, for the first time, he wondered if that might come back to haunt him. Over the next few days, the Johnsons worked tirelessly to regain their footing. Elijah reached out to colleagues for leads on housing, while Mia threw herself into her art, channeling her emotions onto the canvas. So, meanwhile, began researching Max Sterling. She spent hours at the library and online, piecing together a profile of the man who had uprooted their lives. What she found was both fascinating and infuriating. Max's wealth came from a combination of real estate ventures and high-stakes investments. But beneath the polished exterior were whispers of lawsuits, unethical practices, and a history of stepping on a little guy to get ahead. So couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than just her family. Max Sterling represented a system that thrived on inequality, and she was determined to expose it. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner in their cramped motel room, Zoe shared her findings. "He's not invincible," she said, her eyes blazing with determination. "People have taken him on before, and they've won." Elijah listened carefully, his expression thoughtful. "So, I appreciate your passion, but we need to pick our battles. Right now, we need to focus on finding a new home." "But don't you see?" Zoe pressed. "This isn't just about us. It's about everyone he's ever pushed around. If we don't stand up to him, who will?" Mia reached for Zoe's hand, her voice gentle. "Your father's right. We have to be strategic. But that doesn't mean we're giving up. It just means we're regrouping." Zoe nodded reluctantly, though the fire in her eyes remained. She wasn't ready to let this go. Meanwhile, Max couldn't shake the feeling that the Johnsons weren't out of his life just yet. He had a sixth sense for trouble, and this felt like the calm before the storm. But what kind of storm? He didn't know. All he knew was that the more he tried to push them out of his mind, the more they seemed to linger. Late one night, as he sat in his office reviewing contracts, Max's phone buzzed. It was an anonymous email with no subject line. He opened it cautiously, his eyes narrowing as he read the message. "You think money makes you untouchable, but everyone has a reckoning. Yours is coming." Max's pulse quickened. He couldn't tell if it was a genuine threat or just a prank, but it unsettled him all the same. He deleted the email and poured himself another drink, trying to shake the feeling that his carefully constructed world was beginning to crack. For the Johnsons, the days that followed were filled with small victories and quiet moments of hope. Elijah received a promising lead on a teaching position in a nearby town, while Mia's latest series of paintings caught the attention of a renowned gallery owner. So, meanwhile, continued to dig deeper, uncovering more layers of Max's empire. The tension between their lives and Max continued to build, like two tectonic plates pressing against each other, waiting for the inevitable quake. Both sides were bracing for what would come next, though neither could predict just how explosive the confrontation would be. The tension was like an unspoken shadow, creeping into every moment of the Johnsons' days. At the motel, they tried to keep life as normal as possible, but the weight of uncertainty hung over them. Elijah spent hours on the phone, following up on job leads and making lists of potential homes. Mia painted feverishly, her work taking on darker tones as she processed their recent upheaval. And Zoe was always at her laptop or scribbling in her journal, her focus sharper than ever. Late one evening, Zoe decided to share what she had discovered with a close friend, Amara, who worked as a junior reporter for a local news outlet. Amara was known for her fearless reporting and was already making waves with her investigative pieces. When Zoe explained how her family had been evicted by Max Sterling and how he had a history of exploiting vulnerable tenants, Amara leaned forward, her interest piqued. "That man's a shark," Amara said, tapping her pen on her notepad. "But if there's a story here, we need hard evidence, something concrete." Zoe nodded, her determination unwavering. "I'll get it. I've already started digging. There's something rotten in how he runs his business. I'm going to find it." Over the next few days, Amara and Zoe worked together, poring over public records, old lawsuits, and obscure articles buried in the archives. They found a pattern: properties purchased under suspicious circumstances, tenants forced out under dubious pretenses, and even allegations of bribery to fast-track permits. It wasn't just about the Johnsons anymore. Max Sterling's empire seemed to be built on a foundation of greed and manipulation. Meanwhile, Max was growing restless. The anonymous email still gnawed at him, though he pretended otherwise. He increased security around his penthouse and demanded updates from his team on any potential threats. Linda, sensing his unease, approached him cautiously one morning with more files on the Johnsons. "Sir, I think you should see this," she said, placing the folder on his desk. Max sighed, pinching the bridge at his nose. "What now?" Linda hesitated. "It's about Mia Johnson. Her latest paintings are gaining a lot of attention. Let's talk that she might be the centerpiece of an upcoming exhibition." Max flipped through the pages, his irritation growing. "So, what does that have to do with me?" Linda chose her words carefully. "Her work. It's resonating with people. Critics are calling it a powerful commentary on social inequality and resilience. Some are even linking it to her eviction." Max stiffened. He didn't like where this was going. "Are you saying she's using me to boost her career?" "I'm saying people are starting to pay attention, sir. And it's not the kind of attention we want." Max closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He couldn't afford a PR nightmare, not with his new development project on the line. The investors were already skittish, and any hint of controversy could derail everything. He needed to contain this before it spiraled out of control. At the same time, Mia was beginning to see the ripple effects of her art. Emails poured in from gallery owners, art collectors, and even journalists who wanted to feature her work. One message in particular stood out. It was from a prominent art critic who wanted to interview her about the inspiration behind her latest series. Mia hesitated, unsure whether to accept. She knew the subtext of the question. Everyone wanted to hear about the eviction, the story behind the paintings. But did she want to give them that? Did she want to make her family's struggle public? Elijah noticed her hesitation and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You should do it," he said softly. "Your voice deserves to be heard." Mia nodded, though the decision weighed heavily on her. She agreed to the interview, knowing it would be a turning point, not just for her career, but for their story. While Mia prepared for the interview, Elijah received an unexpected call from one of his former students, now a community organizer. The student had heard about their eviction and wanted to help. "There's a rally happening next week," he explained. "It's about housing rights and holding powerful landlords accountable. Your family's story could inspire others." Elijah wasn't sure how to respond. He always preferred to stay out of the spotlight, to fight his battles quietly and with dignity. But Zoe overheard the conversation and jumped in. "Dad, this is exactly what we need. If we speak up, we can make a difference." Elijah looked at his daughter, her eyes filled with passion, and realized she was right. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about challenging a system that allowed people like Max Sterling to thrive at the expense of others. As the rally approached, word spread about the Johnsons' involvement. Zoe worked tirelessly to prepare a speech, while Mia created a series of posters featuring her art. Elijah, though nervous, began to see the potential for change. They were no longer just victims, they were becoming advocates. On the day of the rally, a crowd gathered in front of City Hall. People held signs, chanted slogans, and shared their own stories of housing struggles. When it was the Johnsons' turn to speak, Zoe stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "We were evicted from our home by a man who sees people as numbers on a balance sheet," she began. "But we are more than that. We are a family. We are artists, educators, dreamers, and we refuse to be invisible." The crowd erupted in applause, and for the first time in weeks, the Johnsons felt a glimmer of hope. But Max, watching the rally unfold on a live stream from his office, felt his frustration boil over. This was exactly what he feared, a public spectacle that could tarnish his carefully curated image. He picked up the phone and barked orders to his PR team. "Fix this. Now." What Max didn't realize, however, was that the more he tried to suppress the story, the more it spread. Social media lit up with posts about the Johnsons, and news outlets began picking up the story. Mia's paintings sold out within hours of the exhibition's opening, and Elijah received offers to speak at universities about his experience. Despite their growing momentum, the Johnsons knew the fight was far from over. Max Sterling wasn't the type to back down easily, and they could feel the storm brewing. But for the first time, they felt like they had a chance, not just to reclaim their lives, but to challenge the very foundations of Max's empire. The question was, how far would Max go to protect his legacy? And were the Johnsons ready for what lay ahead?